My name is Matthew Darius. I'll be moderating today's call. Our presenter, once again, is Angela Pierce. This is the last in our series of webinars. If anyone has missed a prior webinar or needs a copy of the handouts from any of the past ones or links to the recordings, please let me know. I'll type my email address into the chat pane momentarily. If you don't have the presentation for today, I'll also put a link for that in the chat. And if no one has any, actually, to ask a question, you can hit #7# on your phone. That'll notify me that you have a question. I'll put you through to Angela. Otherwise, you can just type in your question using the chat pane on the right-hand side of your screen. With that out of the way, Angela, it's all you.
Hey, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to the third in our three seminars. This topic is going to be discussing a very important segment of the entire relationship in terms of buying, and that is the contracts and what documents create contracts and how they should be created so that they provide the best value and get you what you need from vendors and are clear, concise manner, and really give you the methodology for making sure that the district is protected against anything that might become a liability for the district by virtue of your contracts and bids and quotes being clear and concrete. So we're going to talk about that for the next hour and a half. And I'd also like to mention that at the end of our webinars, there is a survey that goes out to everyone, and we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a response back. We'd like to get your feedback and knowing if this is getting the information to you that you need and whether it's clear enough and how you think everything's going. So I would just like to ask you to take a look at that. It'll only take you a few minutes. There aren't very many questions on it, but it does provide us with some powerful feedback. Thank you very much. So let's get into our webinar. Well, we're going to talk about what a contract is because that really is the basis of all of this information. It is, as defined by the dictionary, a binding agreement between two or more parties, especially legally enforceable, a business arrangement for the supply of goods and services at a fixed price, and a document describing the terms of a contract. So all of those three concepts are going to be discussed as we go through this afternoon. And what's, as I said before, so vitally important is that this is what we do on a day-in, day-out basis to make sure that we acquire the goods and services that we need and that everything is done very above board and legally. Defining and creating that relationship, how do we do that? Setting up the terms and requirements for the transactions between the vendor and the school district, you're ultimately resulting in a valid purchase order to authorize that acquisition. You need to be real clear in your communication when you're talking on the phone, writing something in the document, and you need to prepare clear, accurate, and legally appropriate documents in order to get that legal relationship defined very well. The purchasing agent's appraisal of contract agreements when using state and county contracts, BOCES contracts, or any preferred sources are really important. You have to remember, and I know some of the end users don't really understand this concept, but then when you access one of the state contracts, for instance, and later on we're going to go into some detail in what information is important to the purchasing office to make sure that you know what you're doing when you create your purchase order. You need to be able to read that contract, and you need to be able to know what are some of the conditions under those contracts. People in purchasing should be aware of that state contracts are usually, if not always, relying on there being a delivery that is included in the price that's indicated on the contract, and that it is to your door. It is not an inside delivery. It is not a delivery with setup unless you're going to be asking the vendor for that and want to pay extra for it. So these things you need to know what kind of contract you're reading so that you know exactly what you're getting. I like to bring this up again and again because I think one of the areas that continually foils people is the delivery terms. And if you don't pay that particular attention to delivery terms and anything that relates to that, they may influence the cost of your shipment. Not only do you cause the possibility of an end user, for instance, not knowing that they need to provide some help to the driver to download something or offload something, I should say, they may cancel a delivery that they should be accepting, but no one knew that that was what they were to expect. So it really is in the domain of the purchasing agent to make sure that they know exactly what it is and they communicate that to anybody who's actually receiving for any contract that's let. And the term let is very common in the area of purchasing because contract lettings are what we send out to say this is what we want and this is how we want it. I prepared some concepts to think about before we get into the detail of everything because I know, especially for new purchasing agents, they come into a business office and everything's kind of there, but then as they start to settle into the job, they may start to notice some things that might need to be changed in some manner or modified or updated or whatever needs to be made to the point where it's providing the right solution for the problems that exist currently. And so I'd like to bring these out as some comments. Purchasing agents should review the current office bid documentation, make sure all the terms and conditions components are included in every document. And we're going to go over that in more detail as we go over the bid document itself. But there have been times I know in my career that I've gotten somewhere and I'll find out that, well, one service bid has the components that it needs. Then I look at another one that may have been done by a different purchasing agent at a different time, and it's missing a bid security component, even though it's referencing it, or it doesn't have any wording having to do with the Department of Labor prevailing wage schedule. And so that becomes something, especially as you're in a situation that you're being pushed to do something very quickly, that you want to make sure you're kind of on top of, and especially if you have annual bids, which most of the school districts I know of do, and BOCES. Those annual bids are easy enough to review in their totality prior to anybody sending them out and prior to you being under the most pressure for that. So that would be a suggestion I'd like to put out there. You'd also want to provide standard wording. If one bid says it one way and another bid says it another way, as you develop your sense of what's in the information and how you talk to vendors, you need to modify the information, and it really seems to be kind of reinventing a wheel if you just don't use the standard wording and modify it only as it pertains to the specific bid specification or the scope of work. So you're going to make small provisions. For instance, if you've got a paragraph in there that talks about visiting the sites and you indicate what sites they are. Well, if you have a situation where you're only going to be doing your high school, then you want to put that school in there and take the rest of these school names out. But that's just a modification on that particular bid, and then on your other bids you'd have everything else contained. You want to update your documents as needed to reflect any changes in requirements or policies. If you now are going to require that a vendor have $2 million in insurance, because that's what your purchasing policy now says, then you need to make sure that those updates are done. And I would do it on a basis where you get all of the bids that are in that category, usually service bids, and you indicate that on a spelled swoop across all your bids. Your general condition packets, which are the boilerplate packets that are normally maybe 4 pages long, that are put in with every bid packet as it goes out to the vendor, you want to make sure you know what the contents of those packages are. I know when I started in my last school district, I had been always using the standard understanding that the bid prices should be firm for probably not more than 60 days 90 days on occasion. And when I started looking at the bids in that school district, all of the bids had a terms and condition notation that the pricing should be held for a year from the date of the bid opening. So when I read over the general conditions packet, I was pleased and a little surprised to see that packet absolutely echoed the one-year pricing, and so it had been modified to show that that district wanted to have that kind of situation going on. You should know what it is, because if you're getting a question from a vendor, you want to know how to answer that question. And you don't want to answer it from the top of your head. You want to answer it specifically to the clause in the general conditions that speaks to it, especially in some of the situations that I've also encountered when we have vendors who are not performing and we want them to perform as per the contract. I use the specific words and notations that are in that contract to explain to them that if they fail to do what they're supposed to do, that we are going to actively pursue that particular paragraph and whatever the words are to indicate that we will buy from an outside source and charge the vendor for that difference in price. And so you're very specifically dealing with and clearly dealing with what exactly happens when your contract is not being followed. But you, again, have to know what's in the contract to begin with. I can't stress it enough. The clauses on shipping default and substitution of bid items and the remedies for those things are a very important piece of how we do business. And if you haven't already, through the first two webinars that we've done, if you haven't already looked at your school district's general conditions packet, please do so and make sure that you ask questions if you think you have a question about what's in there. And, you can ask other people in the purchasing department. If you're not the purchasing agent per se, you can ask the purchasing agent. There should be a clear, comfortable understanding of what those conditions are. And you need to know how to handle a vendor who is in default and be very confident referring to that article or clause in the bid where the information is found. Can't shy away from discussing contract terms with vendors and bidders. That's where you get to fall back on what's in writing. It's not something you are verbally telling the person that is something that can't be backed up. You need to be very, very specific. You also have to be specific about the timeline needs and the delivery cost inclusion when making comparisons across vendors. It's not unbelievable for a vendor, one vendor to give you the delivery cost included and another not. And you need to develop an idea of what you're looking at and how a vendor responds that really does give you kind of a place to launch from and ask another question, especially in quotes that are done verbally. I find that asking for a written quote, and that's really just a simple email or a fax. Most vendors are kind of interested in doing that because it makes it clear for them, too, exactly what they've told you they're going to do. And when writing, information is usually clear and undisputable. So you really don't have to guess about what they're saying. They should put it down. And if it's not down on that piece of paper, like a delivery inclusion, that you probably have a good reason to ask the question again. Whereas sometimes if you're on a phone and you're just bantering back with the vendor about some items and the cost of the items, you may not be able to be sure that they really did do what you asked them to do. So it's a heads up on trying to do things, and it really doesn't take that much more time and does make it a lot cleaner in terms of knowing exactly what you want. Whenever you're doing specifications, and we talked about this at some length last time, you want to make sure that you're very, very accurate. And in your scope of work for public works contracts, you really need to know that it's exactly what you need done. Now, it's not uncommon for a vendor to call you back, because I'm sure it's, as I had happen, many of you are getting information from other people in terms of what the needs are, and you try to maybe augment it by flushing it out with some additional information that you know is valid. But in the reality of things, you know, an IT person could give you a spec that they think is right, and then when you send it out, people are going to get back to you and say, hey, there's something off with this number, there's something off with this description. If you find out that that's absolutely true, you need to be able to incorporate those corrections into the document and then notify the vendors who are out there quoting or bidding of all the changes, because you want everyone, as we talked about before, to be on an even playing field. So you would certainly first contact your IT department or your facilities department or whoever gave you the original spec to go through what the issues are, to make sure the issues make sense and are accurate, and then you want to make sure the vendors are all involved too. And if it means you need to move a bid opening date, then you do that via addenda also, and then you can re-advertise that. But the important thing is you want to salvage as much of a bid that you can, even if there's a problem with it, because you don't want to go through the effort of redoing the entire bid and mailing it all out again and having vendors have to re-respond if you can avoid it. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but the better able you are to respond to an issue like this quickly, and the more time you've given vendors to be able to respond quickly, the better off you'll be in the long run. There are going to be in your domains like contracts, and as you acquire something that's relevant for terms and conditions, for instance, if a change perhaps in the way that the Department of Labor is doing something, you want to make sure you hit all of those documents. So keep a schedule, do a listing, something that would allow you to know what you've done and what you haven't done, or what you've asked your people to do. And don't assume that previous purchasing agents, as I said before, included all the right information. So you may need to review others' work to make sure that you're doing the best for your district so that the information is going out appropriately. You need to realize that the contracts give vendors rights, too, and the purchasing agent must know what those rights are and must keep them in mind when dealing with vendors or bidders, because, you know, there are some very specific things that people who are end users may not understand, but you as a purchasing person need to keep in mind. We're running the business end of the deal. I've had many end users say to me things like, well, I'm not paying the vendor because I didn't like the way he talked to somebody on the phone, or I'm not paying the vendor because I got, you know, 90% of my stuff, but I didn't get it all. Well, you know what? That may be true, but the reality is we need to keep a working relationship with vendors. And if there's an issue or something that's come up that is not all the vendor's fault, or is not something that the vendor has complete control over, then you have to be able to step in and make it work and make those relationships work. Each interaction you have with a vendor has to be in an ethical and fair manner, so you need to make sure that you do what's necessary to keep the relationships going, and make the end users also aware of where their roles are and what they need to do in terms of letting you know about issues that come up from time to time. And after you've done all this work on revising specs and updating, especially if they're large revisions, I'm not talking about a small change, but if you're going through a lot of bid terms and conditions changes, you might want to have your district's attorney take a look at it and make sure that everything is up and running and appropriate and legal and all that good stuff. And I think you'll be able to bounce that against the business administrator or other people in the district to make sure you're doing it, in the right manner. But you also don't want to send everything, as I said, to your district's attorney, because you'll probably be there for years trying to get all that information back to you. Now we're going to talk about the purchase order again, because that document is actually going to formulate the evidence of the contract, the relationship that you and the vendor have, because by virtue of the reference to the bid or some other entity's contract, the terms and conditions of the original contract agreement are really being validated and referred to and become part of what is now considered the purchase order and the contract in total. This is presupposing you don't have another contract in place that is in addition to the purchase order that the vendor perhaps has created. And we will talk about that kind of a situation a little bit later. But I'm talking about really those POs that are produced from a valid bid or state contract or BOCES bid, something that has been bid out that you now are referencing in order to make the link between what the original terms were and what now you're buying, with the purchase order now formulating some specific information on exactly what you're going to be buying from that vendor, and as we're about to go over, the place and the time frame for delivery. You want to make sure you have a department person within a large building so it goes to the right place. It's going to reference a bid number or a quote number or a BOCES reference, which is usually a bid number for BOCES, or a New York OGS contract, or a preferred source name and catalog number, because those, again, are going to send the vendor as well as the auditors that review your paperwork to the right place to see what the entire contract, because you're not going to put an entire contract with every purchase order. That would be a paper boondoggle to be.
Angela, we have a question.
Oh, sure.
It's from Christy. Go ahead.
I'm trying to I didn't receive the email with the packet, so I'm sitting here just listening, and I can't see anything.
Okay.
I just wondered if someone can send it to me.
Yeah, in the chat window, I posted the packet for you.
I have nothing on my computer. I don't know where to go, apparently.
You don't have anything on your screen. You're just on the call?
Yep, I just have the call.
The information to log on to view the webinar is right in the same email where you got the phone number.
Okay, hold on a second. I had no problem with the other two. Okay, where am I supposed to go here?
There's a link you're supposed to click on.
The web presentation?
Yep.
It says HTTP secure.
Yep.
When I click on that, it says the web page is not available.
Okay, you're going to have to contact Confertel then, because everything's good on our end.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Angela, go ahead.
Okay. You want to put in the quantity and unit price, unit package of the item, so that you want to put in 5 dozen of whatever it is that you're buying. The next piece following would be the description of the item or items. The quoted bid price and delivery cost, if the delivery cost was quoted separately. If not, it would just be the quoted bid price is going to go on the purchase order. Packing, marking instructions, if you have any. And the method of shipment, if you need to put that on there. Sometimes people specify UPS, sometimes they specify FedEx. If you're doing that, if it's not specified, it's going to be assumed to be the best way possible, which in the old days, some of us remember, that's what we used to put on purchase orders, is best way, and I think we've really stopped doing that. because it's assumed it's going to come the best way that the vendor would ship. And in some cases on state contracts and sometimes county contracts, there is a reference in their response that says how they're going to ship whatever they're going to ship. If a cash discount is being offered, you would have the terms of that on there. For instance, if I've seen this on state contracts particularly, a vendor will offer 5 or 10% discount if you pay within a very shortened time frame, like 5 days after the receipt of the, or even 10 days sometimes after the receipt of the invoice. And as usual, your accounting codes used for encumbrances would appear on the purchase order because that's where the money will have already been debited. Now, this is an area we haven't spoken about a whole lot, but I'm going to bring it out because I think it's very important, especially in the last 5 years or so where a lot of auditing has been done of documents like purchase orders. And I think not only have we seen it in the Office of the State Comptroller's auditors, but now I think it's caught fire in the areas of the internal auditors in terms of processing and procedures, and definitely the claims auditors, where they too want to see information that really kind of talks about where exactly did you get this price from? What I used to do is keep a copy of this list of items with the purchase order that's actually kept in AP, because then it'll be more available to the auditor who's there to do claims. And ultimately, when another auditor comes, they often ask for the AP copy so that they want to see what the payment copy actually had as part of its information. So we're talking about, of course, a list of the items. If the PO indicates as per attached list, and you've got 50 items that came as an attachment to the original purchase order, then you want to make sure that you have a copy of that list for every single part of the purchase order. So if you have a 5-part purchase order, you want to make sure there's a list attached to each part. And only this item is mailed to the vendor with the PO in terms of the rest of the items that I'm going to talk about, because now we're getting into a copy of the relevant New York State County BOCES pages. And by relevant, I mean not the whole document, but there are usually title pages that represent the time period that's being dealt with. There's going to be a page that has the vendor who's been awarded. There's going to be information sometimes on the same page as the vendor award, sometimes on another page that tells you what the pricing is supposed to be. So you want to have that as part of this packet. If you're doing a summary form for a quote, either written or verbal, you'd want to make sure the summary is there. But again, these are not items that are going to the vendors. These are items that are going to be there as backup for your purchasing pricing source, basically. And written quotes, and I know you can't read that because I guess it didn't make it on the screen, but it says written quotes if a written quotation was issued or received, for that matter, because you might have done a verbal quote and you have some written quotes for it. Well, I would include them, because then it's clear that you picked the right vendor and you're buying from the right source. It would not be unusual for a claims order to come to purchasing and ask for these items if he or she were looking for such information. So this just makes it easier for everybody. It also gives some backup information to accounts payable if they're looking for an answer to a question. Now we're going to talk about actually preparing these documents and what that entails. Preparing a quotation. When the PA determines that the user's needs require a verbal quotation, that's usually because of the monetary threshold that's been involved from the purchasing policy that the Board of Education created under General Municipal Law 104B. They include on this document. They include an item description and an estimated quantity. They can use a catalog number, which it would be helpful if they had the catalog date, a number. Usually catalogs are dated and numbered, so that if there's an issue or question, somebody can refer back to it. The date by which the response to the quote must be received. A delivery cost inclusion should be discussed so that there's no questions. They're looking for that. And also a request for a delivery time frame, because that may be part of your decision making, because if you need something very quickly, you're going to perhaps look at a vendor who might not be lowest quoter, but they can deliver in the time frame that you need to. And then the summary form should be used to organize the response results, and that becomes the backup to the PO that I talked about in the previous slide. And as I did in in the first webinar, I did include a copy of a document that I had created, which I created in an Excel file format. Certainly it can be created in other ways. It just made it easier to summarize the data. And often when you're doing quotes, you're not dealing with lots and lots of items. If I were dealing with a quote with lots and lots of items, then I would have provided an additional form that would have had the items listed and a place for the unit price and total price along with the quantity, and then I would have summarized it using this form so that you have everything easily able to be identified and compared. And particularly when you're comparing here, you're making sure that the information on timelines and on delivery costs are very, very clear. But if you're not, and that was a verbal quotation, but when you are using a written quotation, you probably are going to put a little more information into that. You may mail it or email it or fax it to the relevant vendors, but you're probably going to have a few more terms and conditions. As previously, you're going to detail the items. You're going to set a date for the information to be received. And you're also going to give them some information about where the item's going to be delivered. You probably would want to have some notation that if they're involved in a state or county contract, they should put the state or county contract number in so that you can have that to refer back to. And then you're going to get those quotations by the date that the information was supposed to be received, and you start to tabulate the quotation. Again, I'm emphasizing that you make sure all the computations are correct, and you want to make sure that they comply with the requirements you've put in there. And in this particular case, you certainly should feel free to contact the vendors for clarification if you need to have clarification. I wouldn't renegotiate pricing at this point, but if there is something that wasn't clear, like perhaps they left the cost of the delivery off, I would get them to give it to me and refax it, and then or remail it or whatever they did, and then I would use that information as a comparison tool to the other vendors to make sure that everything is comparing apples to apples. Then once the award is made to a vendor, a purchase order may be created and a copy of the quote summary form and quote should be attached. The contract reference is going to be reflected on the PO by notation of the quotation number, and sometimes a vendor will put on their quote, or a bid for that matter, a vendor reference number, their own number that kind of tells them exactly what this bid is and what the pricing is. That's been something that I think a lot of the end users trip over, and I've had to catch it when I was processing purchase orders, because if you don't include the vendor's reference number, the vendor often doesn't have that link to exactly what the pricing is, and can create a situation where you're being costed out at the wrong price, and then your AP has to your accounts payable department and sometimes your purchasing agent are going to have to go back and forth with the vendor trying to figure out where it went wrong. And it really is a mistake that was made on the part of the district in sending out the information. So you want to keep in mind vendor reference numbers can be really, really important. And here, too, we're going to put that summary form to organize the responses so that really is a good backup to the PO. I know in the case of my last district, the claims auditor insisted on seeing one of those, and I know of other districts where that is true also. So it made it a lot easier for lots of people. Okay, well, there are times you're not going to be doing your own quotation or you're not going to be doing your own bid, and so we're going to talk for a few minutes on how to document relevant pages of other non-district bids. For instance, the New York State OGS contract, there's going to be certainly a area in the contract that discusses what the items are that are in that commodity and the term of the contract, and it's usually on the title page of the document. I don't know if everybody's had a chance or is using this New York State OGS contracts, but I did on my next slide put in a sample of a contract, and we're going to go over that. But you'd want to be able to know that you've looked at that contract and you know the terms and conditions of the contract yourself, so that you know it's going to do what you need to do and ship in the way you need it to ship, and the vendors are complying in a way that you need them to comply. You also want a page showing the awarded vendor and the contract number, so that that's going to relate back to that contract number you put on the face of the purchase order. And a page showing price on unit price bids. There may be another page that shows a percentage discount or sometimes a percentage discount off of a catalog or a price book. Those are listed often next to the vendor and contract number, but not always. So you need to know where those items are and develop kind of your own methodology for getting this information quickly acquired. Sometimes I used to, not sometimes, I used to, for those items that came up over and over again, for instance, textbook purchases, I would make a copy of the contract and put it in a binder and just take out information as I needed. The only downside to that is that sometimes there are contract updates the state does on a intermittent level, and so it may be happening all the time, and you want to be able to see that, exactly where you're going to get that information and make it as up to date as possible. This is not exactly how the state of New York's contracts look, except that when I went to copy it, this is the best I could get out of it. So I'm going to go over some of the key points here. I happen to pull down the books and non-print library materials and related ancillary services. It's got a group number, 20,060. If you were looking for this, you could, on the website for the OGS contracts, you could look under group number, or you could put in library, and you might get library materials and library books. So you'd have to choose the right contract. Then award number is usually not a number that we would reference because we're really looking for the contract number of the vendor. But the contract period is very important, and here you can see it says January 1, 2009 through December 31, 2013. So if I have a purchase order that's dated December 31st, 2010, we know that, in fact, that purchase order is valid because it falls within that time frame for the contract term. The only time that wouldn't be valid is if that particular vendor was struck from the contract, and then you wouldn't see his or her name at that point in time. But that's less common, and you usually get lots of updates about knowing that. For those of you who are purchasing agents who are not already on the OGS website's automatic contract emails, you might want to consider that because that can be very useful, especially if it's bids that you tend to look at. And if not, I just would say, go in and look on the website periodically just to see what's going on with the contracts you tend to use the most and see if there are updates and that information needs to be changed. Or if a contract has, of course, expired, you'd want to look at that and say, hey, I better get myself a new contract or see what's going on. And the rest of the information that's on here is really not relevant outside of the fact that if you put this page down or you copy a page of this from the website and you put it into your packet, there's one detail that's taken care of. Now this is the same contract, only a few pages later, and again, it's not in the format that it normally would be seen in, which is a lot prettier, but I wanted to at least discuss the concepts of what was being discussed here. This is a contract under books and non-print library materials. It's an award for BMI educational services, and it gives you information on the contract number, which is PC64320. It gives you contact information, which unfortunately got a little misrepresented when I sent this to Matthew. But the telephone numbers, usually are lined up. There's a fax number. There's a person to contact. There's a website. So there's all this information that you can use. But the auditor is looking for other kinds of information like, is this a real contract with this PC64320? Is it actually the number on your purchase order? So there's actually a link there. But again, for your purposes, you'd want to be able to know, well, if you had an order that's $15,000, you've got an additional discount of 10%. There were other discounts on other pages, which unfortunately I did not bring in, but that you could look at and see what is the relevant piece for what you're buying. That there's a minimum order of $25, which is important for you to know, especially in areas like furniture where there might be a $300 minimum, and if somebody's trying to buy a chair, you may not be able to use that contract effectively. Other thing is a delivery guarantee. It says three days after receipt of order, so that's very important information for you that I suspect your end users would never really realize. And even if they have this page, which I know I used to send them information on the contract, so I would send them an actual whole contract, but I very rarely felt that they read the entire thing, nor did they have to, as long as they kind of got the idea that they needed to buy from that vendor and reference that vendor's PC number and access that vendor's pricing schedule under the state contract. Just as another example, I pulled down another OGS contract. This happens to be on paper towels. Again, there's a contract period specified, 2009 to April, May 1, 2009 to April 30th, 2014, under group number 23400. And here in this particular case, looking at this contract, it's on a zone level, which means it's each zone of, it contains a number of New York State counties, so you'd look under the zone that your county fell under. Paper towels, single fold is the one item I picked out. There were several items on here. But for Zone 1 counties, those school districts would pay $18.72 for 1 to 24 cases, $17.54 for 25 to 99 cases, and 100 more cases for $16.39. It is Torque Universal SK1850A tissue that is manufactured by SCA Tissue. And it tells you the size of the towel. It tells you what you can expect in the package. It even tells you the fiber and recycled content. And if that's something you're looking for, then you've found a towel that you can buy. And then you would attach this page to your PO along with the previous page, and that would constitute your auditor's information unless they're asking for even additional data, which I haven't found to be the case, but I can't speak for everybody in the universe. So that would cover basically your state contracts. County contracts, it really depends on the county. I know some counties have fantastic websites. I know Suffolk County here on Long Island has a wonderful website. Nassau County's working on it. Their website's not very easy to follow, and they certainly don't have a lot of terms and conditions. They do have bid awards, but not really a lot of information. So you have to really go by your county, and I would assume most of you know your county purchasing people by now, and either use their website or call them. And I found that most of the time county people are particularly helpful in getting you information on their bids, and will send it out to you if you need them. It certainly becomes more easier and lots faster if you can go online and get the information there. But you know what? You have to do with what you're dealt. And it's not only your county that you can deal with. You can deal with other counties, as we spoke about before. You just have to make sure that the county's bid terms and conditions allow for political subdivision use. That means you. And then you would add a copy of the county contract information on the term of the contract, the awarded vendor, and pricing, as we were talking about for OGS contracts. Here you can do it, and again, you can do these things two different ways, actually. You don't have to attach them to the contract if you really feel that that's a problem. But then you'd have to have them available for the auditor or administrator. So you need to develop a system, and it's really up to you how you do that. I just kind of found that it was easier for me to have, at least for county and state contracts, attachments to POs. The auditor seemed much happier with this. Now this happens to be, again, I couldn't take it directly from the site. I had to recreate it. But this is a contract that Suffolk County does on calculators. And you can see that they have a commodity code that they use to isolate what the item is. They have a contract number. I happen to have always liked Suffolk County's contract numbers because they embed the date of the contract expiration in it. And they also put some kind of small letter characterization of what the contract is. So as simply as a C for calculators, 033113 is the contract expiration date and the contract number. What I always found very, very useful is that my end users never could get that concept for some reason, particularly in facilities, so that I could easily spot when a requisition came to me and was for the wrong termination time period. So I would have the opportunity to kick it back to them and say, oh, contract's over. You can't buy whatever this is. So in any event, the auditor gets to see now the period of the contract, which is valid for right now, the vendor, the contact information. In this particular case, this county contract has information right on the title page that tells you what the item is. It's an Adler 448 PD plus. It's $129.29 each. And then if you wanted to have a service or maintenance cost during the second year of the contract, if it's warranted for 1 year on all parts and labor, it would be $35 per call. And then underneath that would be further information with the name and telephone number of the purchasing agent. So that's all nicely contained in one package. In some of their other contracts, they would have a listing. Tires, for instance, would have a listing of all the tires, and I would put the relevant pages of the tire contract as part of the attachment to the title page and put that with the purchase order for the auditor. Now, BOCES bids often have, typically have a bid number. And you put that on the purchase order as the reference number. And then you could use relevant pages of that bid and pricing pages, but often it seems like that because there was the entire BOCES bid document, and especially if you're using it a lot of times during the course of the year, I would just put that in a separate folder or a binder Actually, I use binders for that myself, but you could use a separate folder, and then I would just keep it with all the bid materials for that year, and if you store your bid materials in your basement or whatever, I would store that binder with it so that everything was there should somebody want to pull it out and take a look at it. Make it a lot easier for reviews after the fact. Then, of course, if you're dealing with the preferred sources, their catalog numbers and the date of their catalog is usually sufficient. I would also keep a copy of their binders or catalogs and put that in with those bids for that year, too, as long as I used one of those preferred sources. If I didn't, then I didn't. And the federal OGS purchases, you do your best with that documentation, too, and I think very few people are actually using them. They're technology contracts, but I would put whatever relevant pages would be there if you were using them. Now we're going to go back to our own bids and what we want to make sure we have as components to those bids. Now, I really haven't said this before, but I'm going to say it now. These are very, very legal documents. The purchase order, the bids, the contracts, everything is an important legal document and should be treated like that, and you should have your staff aware of the fact that they are. So there should be no situations where we're losing our bids or losing our paperwork in any way, shape, or manner. They should understand that these are fundamental and necessary documents for doing business in our locales. And when we're putting together these contracts, we need to remember that what we put in them is really important in terms of how everything's going to work out in the long run. So the pieces that belong here, and we've talked about these before, but I'm going to go over them a little bit more in detail. Start out with, basically a legal notice, general conditions, which is that boilerplate that usually you have as part of the bids that you always send out, and it's usually printed up every year unless you have it on your computer and attached when you go out to bid. The terms and conditions that you yourself are looking at every year to make sure they're updated and complete. A statement of non-collusion, which is a form that usually doesn't bear any need for change if it's done correctly from the beginning. The bid form, which is incorporated with the specifications sometimes, where you have a place for the name and address of the vendor and then some other information that would be pertinent for your use, and sometimes would have the items listed for unit price and then total price. And the specifications, or in a case of a public works contract, the scope of work. So these are all your basic pieces of a bid. The legal notice, which is what contains the time and date of the bid opening, is going to be published in a newspaper, whatever your Board of Education designates as your newspaper on their annual reorganization. You can have more than one newspaper, but you have to use the ones that they designate. Sometimes you can even use a third if you have two already, but you have to, again, make sure you're using the first two. And all of that carries a price with it, so in these times it may not be as easy to do all of that. But then you have to have a written copy of the legal notice placed into the bid packet. So that's what it is in terms of a piece of it. The legal notice advertisement must take place at least 5 days before the opening of the bid, but not including the day of opening. And the common practice is really to allow for at least 2 to 4 weeks from advertisement to bid opening, so that in fact there's enough time to get everything done, and it leaves time for there to be an addendum if you need to send it out without creating a lot of a hassle. The general conditions that have to accompany each bid really do describe all of these things, and we've discussed these items before. I don't think I'm going to go over into in a detail, but you need to know that they should at least cover those items. That's what they're designed to do, because the terms and conditions are not really there to give you boilerplate, generalized information on how to handle things. And I say generalized, but it's specific generalized, because it tells you exactly how you're going to handle a problem with a vendor not delivering and how you're going to define contract and all this other very important stuff. The terms and conditions now are going to be providing very appropriate details to this particular bid, including the contract period, the delivery sites. It's going to give you those specific items that you wish to buy and the scope of the work that is involved, especially if you're doing a concrete bid. You're going to have a lot of detail on that scope of work. You want to detail how bid cancellation will be handled, i.e., 30 days notice is often a component of that, and then you tell them whether they'll be prorated for any costs that have been already handled. And you really have to stylize it the way that it makes sense for your district. If you have electronic bid submissions going on, the terms and conditions should outline how the electronic bids will be handled, and particularly just document how you're going to have them submit that information. In service or public works bids, you're going to have a few more items of detail. You're going to probably provide the site addresses and inspection details, because often in service or public works bids, you want the vendor to come in and actually look at what they're doing and validate that they understood exactly what the work was by when they signed the bid. It's going to detail the bid security and insurance requirements, which are always, well, not always, but mainly necessary for public works bids and some of the service bids. Reference the Department of Labor prevailing wage schedule attachment. There should be a clause that describes that and refers to the prevailing wage schedule. There's going to be a specification on the method of payment. You should also ask for vendor references for jobs that are similar in scope and nature, and go for at least 3. And then you should, if you can, provide a stylized vendor qualification statement that can be filled out by the potential bidder. And this is nice to do because you have then a consistent platform for vendors to provide their qualifying information, so everyone's responding the same way. And if someone doesn't answer a question, it's not an omission of, it looks like it's a true omission, rather than if they were just giving you their own statement about who they are, they might just omit a particular area without even thinking about it that you might be interested in. So it provides a nice consistency that way. The statement of non-collusion, we've spoken about that in the past webinar series. We really want to make sure it's signed by a company official attesting that the bid pricing was derived independently without bid rigging. You don't want to ever accept a bid without it being signed, because attorneys often look at this as a smaller infraction if you get it signed before the board is given the bid award. That's usually okay. I usually try to do it within a couple of days of the bid opening because I really didn't want to even deal with a bid if it wasn't, the non-collusive wasn't signed. And it worked well that way. The vendors often don't have any problem signing the non-collusive. It's sometimes just a mistake they made when they're filling out the paperwork. The other area that I just think I mentioned for a second is that also seems to have on bid security. And again, the attorneys I work with have always said, if you get the bid security within a couple of days after the bid opening, certainly prior to making a decision on where you're going with the award, then you can accept it. And then, if somebody challenges that, then that'll have to be dealt with. The bid form includes a place for prices to be indicated. Sometimes it's a multi-page form. Sometimes it's a single form. It really depends on what the item is. that document also provides for a bidder's name, address, someone to sign a printed name, and a title of the signatory, so you know who you're dealing with. In recent years, the federal identification number has been important, especially for responding to the Department of Labor. Telephone number, fax number, and email addresses have become very important, especially if you want to interact with vendors to get an answer about a product that they're sending to you. It's kind of handy to have the email. And they can enter this all on their documentation as they're responding to the bid, which is handy. Specifications must detail what the minimum standard would be for the items. We've gone over that in detail our last seminar. The scope of work describes the details for those public works service bids, referencing materials to be provided by virtue of the manufacturers involved, details the work completion time frame and the days of work. All of those are important components of a scope of work. And in both of these areas, you don't want to be so detailed that only one vendor can respond to the bid, because then that means that you're restricting competition. And as we talked about previously, competition is what all of this is about. You want to foster competition. You want to get as many people involved in the bidding process. It helps the school district in terms of getting the best price and using those taxpayer funds in the best way. There's a little piece that I'm just going to touch upon. Many of you are aware of this, but the law changed a few years ago so that it did give us a little better leeway in terms of construction contracts. These are often, and you can't see it, I'm sorry, because of the cutoff on here. These bids are often prepared and released by engineers or architects that the district pays to formulate the details of the contract and the bid, and usually the architect contacts the school district, and you are in fact in charge of getting a legal notice and assigning a bid number and all those good things, which are important things. And then you're the site where the actual bid opening often happens. A few years ago, the bid thresholds exceeding $3 million in the counties of New York City, $1,500,000 in Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester, and then $500,000 in all other New York counties were indicated as being the threshold for construction contracts needing to separate the contracts for bidding purposes. So now you'd have multiple contracts when these thresholds are exceeded for heating, ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical. And then you would open them as separate bids, it's the same bid number, but separate components of those bids, and then often facilities and your architect would be also a part of determining who was going to be proposed as awardee to the Board of Education. But, you know, the current state of New York right now, there are a lot less of these construction contracts than there used to be. So, but this is a valid contract, and these bids do provide a contractual basis for a link to a purchase order, the same way every other one did. Now, there are other contracts that are used in school districts, too. Vendors often present their own contracts to be signed. Sometimes it's a vendor for a state contract or other pricing source because that's the way they do business. And sometimes it's a vendor who is just coming to us and wants to do some kind of service in our district, and their contract is what they have as the document, and often the district will take it and send it to an attorney, and if it's approved, they just go ahead and take it to the board. All contracts should be awarded by the Board of Education in advance of execution of the contract, so you want to make sure in every case you can, and I know sometimes we get our information about some of this stuff after the fact, but it should go to the board in advance of execution. It's gone to your legal department already, and then I'm going to say this as nicely as I can. When we do a district bid, you don't want people to be giving you another contract, because the bid is really the underpinning of the contract. You don't want them now giving you their terms and conditions. But there are some situations where, you just can't avoid it. Leasing bids for copiers, for instance, one of the areas you can put out the bid and you can say this is what you want to do, but I'd be very surprised if the vendor would not come back and say, hey, you have to sign my paperwork. And you have to be very careful then that you're not letting them change the concept of what was in your contract, and means someone has to go over it and really perhaps reject some of the areas. And sometimes that person is going to be you as the start, and sometimes that person is going to was going to be the attorney. It ultimately probably would go to the attorney just to make sure everything was above board. There are also other service items like internet service or telecommunications or alarm system maintenance, and I'm just giving you some examples. There are more than those that come up. And certain public work contracts also come up from time to time as needing someone in the district to sign off on a contract for the vendor. And there are times that the school district will forge their own contracts with persons and entities for a variety of services. I know that in my experience, we always did a contract that we sent to other school districts for educational or health services for district students. And we would prepare the contract, we'd send it to them, and then they would respond back, and our board would approve it, and then everything would be put in place for them to be paid whatever the services costs were. In the area of special education therapy providers, occupational, physical, speech therapy, and all other services in that area, absolutely, we look for contracts. We want to make sure that the people or the entities that are providing these have insurance and that they are able to comply with the requirements that we need, and also we know exactly what their prices are, so we're not dealing with a surprise price change in the middle of a school year. And then, of course, the last area that the district often forges a contract or accepts a contract that they will give to us and we would send to our attorney would be in the area of professional services. Generally, those are those exempt services that can be handled by RFP, and certainly if an RFP is involved, there's going to be a response or a notation on the purchase order that refers to that RFP, but they definitely would be signed by the district and presented to the board and made sure that the contract was in place before you started using whoever the entity was. Now, the last piece of this is just something I devised as a concept of what you would expect to see in a bid folder. And I just share this as an offering. I found that organization of bid folders is an important thing, especially since we have so many people who are interested in them, auditors, legal people, and it's good to have it kind of organized in a way that makes sense and is consistent. So I share this with you, and perhaps, if you can use it, that would be a useful thing for you. You should at the very least have these items in your bid folders: an original and copies of the entire bid document that was released to the vendors, including any of the addenda that were released, an original legal notice affidavit with indications of dates of publication, That's usually something you get from the newspaper that they send to you with their invoice, and if your accounts payable has it in their domain, you should acquire it from them because they need to give it to you. It really should be in the bid folder. It's asked for by auditors, and it's really better not to have to send them to someplace else. Backup for specifications with a request from the originator. That's useful just to keep you, honest in terms of how did this all come about, and it wasn't all your idea. A list of potential bidders to whom the bids were released, and that's usually actually a listing that if people contact you after the legal notice has been sent out there, I would always have my staff add to that list in that bid, which there was really only one list, any add-ons and when they picked it up and who picked it up, so that if there was any question about the vendor or the bid, that we knew exactly where it came from. If there's a bid that requires a prevailing wage schedule, the schedule should be in there also. After the bid award, you're supposed to be sending to the Department of Labor, and you can do this online. It's a very quick transaction. Who it is that was awarded the bid, how much was it awarded for, details about their federal ID number, and this is so that the Department of Labor knows who the awardee is, that they may have to come in and ask you for your certified payrolls. And when you do that, you should take a copy of the transmission of that data so that you know that you did it, and then that is placed in the bid folder also. Then I would get all the bid documents that were received at the opening from the prospective bidders, including any that were no bids, and put them into the folder also. Envelopes with the date stamps from the open bids should be put in the folder or very close to it. Some of these folders get quite large, so you perhaps have to use multiple file folders, but keep them all together within the same Pendaflex. And then there often is correspondence to vendors. Sometimes the correspondence is a return of an unopened late bid with a copy of the stamped envelope. You want to keep a copy of that there in your bid folder. You want to return bid security to vendors who did not win the bid, or return the bid security at the end of the contract for the awarded vendor. You want to keep that correspondence in the bid folder. Any information regarding item awards that you might do. I used to send a copy of what items they were awarded to each of the vendors on my annual bids for science and art and all those other good annual commodity groups. And there would be a copy of that information put into the bid file so that it was clear that I had done that. And then, of course, there might be instances where you have a problem with a vendor and you put them on notice. You want to put a copy of that letter into the bid folder, but I would also put a copy of that letter into another more accessible file too, so that when you're about to do your new bids, you want to go over and see if you've resolved all the issues that have come up with vendors, because if not, this does provide a basis for legal steps to be taken, and possibly a future non-award to the vendor. So these all become really, really important documents that you want to keep on top of. In terms of bid security, now that's, as I said before, mainly in bids that are public works or, sorry about that, public works or service contracts. Those I did not keep in the bid folder. What I would do with those would be to record them, referencing the bid number and description, and place them in a fireproof file for safekeeping. I would then return the bid security as appropriate to the vendors, and then put the letter that I used to send them their bid security with a copy of the check or the bid bond attached to that letter and put that into the file itself. And then that way, should there be a problem with a fire, at least you've kept their checks and bid bonds safe as you could keep them. Often, I think you don't place a bid file into a fireproof file. If you did, then that would be fine too, and then you wouldn't have to necessarily separate them. But also I found that separating them also gave us a good way of being able to, at a glance, see that there were things that we needed to respond to at the end of a bid, for instance, or the end of the term of the contract that was easier than going into individual bid files. And our last suggestion in that area is that the file be organized chronologically with the earliest documents at the back of the folder, and as you keep providing documents, put the newer ones on top. And then I think that would kind of make it easier for everyone to find or be, able to find the same documents in the same order. So that's a suggestion for those of you who might, be able to deal with that. That would be at least something to help to keep the organization going. So at this time, I think if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to try and answer them.
Hey, great. If anyone has any questions, you can, for Angela, please hit 7# on your phone. That'll notify me of questions, and I'll put you right through.
At this point, I guess everyone now has information on how to print the slides. I see, Matthew, you responded with the handouts.
Okay, so your last chance to ask Angela any questions you have. Please hit 7# on your phone. Okay, we have no questions. Angela, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending.
Yes, thank you everybody, and hopefully you all will get that survey and give it a look-see and send it back to Matthew. Thank you very much.
Great. Everyone have a great day.
Okay.